we get to the dwarf questions, we had one more question from Urtai about the Minotaurs. And we haven't asked a question about the Minotaurs yet. So he says, looking at the Minotaur base stats, their strength and constitution are simply enormous.
Yeah, they are.
I know they were created through magic by the elves, but still their strength far outstrives that of even the half-giants. Okay, so they are quite stupid and not much for the spirit side either, but really, what were the Minotaurs infused with to give them such enormous strength and constitution?
Magic stuff. And more than a little of that beastly essence. We were talking about the wearers earlier, and the animal that's inside people. And what really, if you look at it from one point of view, what the elves did when they created the Minotaurs was they wove a lot of magic in there. First off, there was a lot of eugenics going on too. I mean, they set out to breed a stronger breed of human. And then they took those guys and warped them. And so what you see is lots of magic going on that was made permanent, and they twisted that beast out of the men. And that, as a result, that's why they look so animalized. There are a lot of critters running around in the world that are these animal-like, these humanoid animals. We've got bear men, and we've got wolf men who aren't werewolves, and the Skrull are rat people. We've got others too, and I'm hoping that some of them are going to get onto the website soon.
So are those created by the elves as well?
No, they're not.
Are they natural phenomena, or these are something from the Beast Lords?
They have shown up lately, and it took everybody a while to figure it out, because anytime something shows up that looks like basically a humanoid animal, everyone immediately goes, oh, the elves are up to no good again. They're making their Minotaur version 3.0 or whatever. And people thought that that's what the Iroquois were at first, and they're wrong. The Iroquois just come from someplace else.
What do you mean, the Iroquois? Oh, never mind.
Yeah, the Iroquois. Not the Iroquois. Yeah. They could be different. A little more different in word. But anyway, these beast men, the wild spawn, these animal people, they're from the Beast Lords. After going through ages of the world where they made alliances with the children of the gods, the children of the Allfather, be they elves or be they druids or be they whoever, it looks like this is a pretty recent phenomenon too. It's not since after the War of the Scourge. It looks like the Beast Lords have finally got together and started creating new children of their own. These bipedal, big, hulking, incredibly strong versions of their totem animal. And why they're doing that has yet to be determined. But they're very, very hostile to everybody. And so we've got whole adventure zones full of wolfmen and bearmen and stuff like that. And they don't even like druids. So
they're from the Beast Lords.
Okay.
Dwarf question back, since we're almost running out of time.
Okay. I wanted to apologize to Iola and everybody for not answering these questions sooner. And I'm going to answer them. And my thanks to Iola and to Marcus, who helped me compile them all at Gen Con, and who relayed the first suite of answers, and so I'm relaying the next ones right now. All right. And the questions that I've got here, about half of them deal with number crunchy system mechanics things, and I'm not going to answer those. Sorry. Everybody's Uber, and they all have cool powers. There. Specifically about dwarves. Dwarves need to eat, they need to sleep, and they need to breathe. Yes. Do they have organs? No. How can that be? Well, Thurin just made them really well. If dwarves can breathe, they can drown. All right. You're probably not going to be able to find the rune stones and translate the Cliffs of Fate per se, or at least not immediately. That's going to be stuff that future characters are likely going to be doing for you. You know, you'll go get them a fragment and they'll tell you what it says, that kind of thing. If any Chaos Lords went into hiding beneath the surface of the earth, you bet the dwarves would have run into them and be fighting big wars with them, and that's the stuff that metaplots are made of. What did dwarves eat and drink in the periods that they were not interacting with everybody? I'm betting that there are hidden valleys up in the mountains that are so high up, almost volcanic caldera type things, that surface dwellers don't really know about, but that dwarves have an exit to, and that's where they're growing their barley and raising their cattle. Once once they learned how to do that from the surface dwellers. Now, would they eat before they met the surface dwellers at all? That's something that, you know, I'm sure Thurin taught them how to make good food. And the mana from Thurin is always a good answer. Let me see. Dwarves will be better when resisting damage than your pulpy humans, yes. Dwarf hair does not grow, and dwarves do place a great amount of importance upon their beards. And this is actually something that Warden and I were riffing together when we first were looking at the dwarf models, which are, I like them a lot. And from people who think they look weird, they do look weird, but I love it. We envisioned a time when the dwarves were first created, when they have these beards, these very geometric shaped beards, and they were plain. And I can see at the very beginning how the dwarves in Thurin's Hall basically paired off, and every dwarf picked another dwarf, and they engraved patterns onto each other's beards. And so I can see it being a saying among the dwarves, is, you know, he's as dear to me as the guy who carved my beard. And the guy who carved your beard is probably still out there running around. And so they have these intricate patterns on them. And there's another thing that we envisioned over time, is that these patterns could be the basis of the clans, in terms of, you know, dwarves are all brothers, but they have these social organizations. Every hold, basically, you know, they have their own pattern that they've etched in on top of the original pattern on their beards. And who knows, if a dwarf does something really remarkable, maybe he gets more stuff etched onto his beard. So the coolest dwarves will have the niftiest beards. And over time, I would love to see where we get more art assets added into the game, where we've got dwarves that have, you know, this corner missing from their beard. They have a hunk taken out of it or whatever. And again, that might be worn as a badge of honor, depending on how it happened to you. Okay. Okay. The biggest dwarf question that has yet to be answered is the whole Liliandra the Fairest thing. And I've been waiting, basically, to get the time to type that up and release it. But instead of doing that, I'm going to tell you a story. Long time ago in the Age of Twilight, no, excuse me, Age of Days, when Thurin told the dwarves, go forth and gather runestones. The dwarves did that up in the Northlands. They met the giants. The first war of stones started. Meanwhile, other dwarves wandered throughout the whole world and gathering up runestones as they went. There was one dwarf in particular who wandered into the deep green woods of the Deathless Empire, and he came upon a glade, and there in the glade was a perfect lake that reflected the sky and the stars, and seated on a rock by the lake was none other than Liliandra the Fairest, who was staring into the water at the reflection of the constellation of Coronandor's ship, longing for his return. And this dwarf saw her and was stunned by her beauty, because she was the most fairest thing that's ever walked the face of Arinth. And in that moment, the first dwarf learned to love beautiful things and not just practical things. And the dwarf was smitten with love for her and took her, and she was, of course, very depressed at the time, so she didn't really put up much of an argument. And he bore her away back to his kinsmen, because he had to show them this marvelous thing that he'd found. And the dwarves were staggered by her beauty. And they named her the Silver Queen because of her hair. And they went back to their forges, and they took a break from making magic weapons, and they started making jewelry and gold and silver. And they covered her in jewels and precious finery. And she actually was quite amused by the dwarves and the whole experience, because they were so awkward and shy and not refined and jaded and bitter like all of her kinsmen. So she actually came out of her stupor and kind of got to liking it. Meanwhile, back on the surface, Liliandra's brother She noticed that she was gone, and after doing some quick running around, and they basically got hot on the trail, and having some of the finest trackers that ever lived, taught by Kanaran himself, they eventually made their way down into the deeps and met the dwarves. They'd met a dwarf or two before, and they found out that they had her and they were keeping her prisoner, and they said, give her back. And the dwarf said, hey, you need to ask nicely. She's our queen now, and she doesn't want to go. And she said, oh, really? And so they opened up a can, just as they did against the centaurs, and they fought their way down to the heart of Hagendor. And or not to the heart of Hagendor. They got almost to Hagendor, but they got to where she was. And they busted in, and she said, "Oh, it's you, brothers." And they said, "Yes, we've come to take you home." And she said, "Okay, look at all this cool stuff they made me." And basically she said, "Hey, I'm going to go home now, dwarves. Don't blame them. Don't blame me. This is really great. You guys are neat." And so she left. She went home with her brothers. And the dwarves, having been schooled by the elves in combat, didn't really know what to do. So they withdrew and sat back and went, "Whoa, that was weird." And legend has it, there's a postscript to this story. That's one story. That's the story of Liliandra the Fair, the Silver Queen. There's another Silver Queen that comes into the lore. Theron Bellowstone, and this is my man Tangent wandering into frame.
Jason Durall, everybody.
Say hello to the fan base.
Just getting a book, that's all. Just going about my business.
Theron Bellowstone, the dwarf who stole a glimpse at the creation of the Titans, and who was the greatest animator ever. After the Silver Queen left the dwarves were so glum, and they so longed for her presence, that Theron decided, you know what I'm going to do? I'm gonna make a replacement. And so he made a Moor-Golem out of silver, who was as fair as Liliandra was. And this is my homage to Fritz Lang's Metropolis. But not nearly as cool as Liliandra was. In fact, she was very selfish and greedy and arrogant. And when the dwarves were piling up riches at her feet, she really liked it. And it got to the point where the different heads, the different thanes of the dwarf holds, each argued that she should come live with them, or that they should share her. The problem was that there was only one to go around. And this is actually the closest to war of dwarf against dwarf that we've ever gotten. There came a point where it came to a shouting match, and it almost came to blows over what dwarfhold was going to get her. And finally, they all came to their senses. The high priests of Thurin went, "Wait a minute, this isn't part of the deal." And they all went, "Oh yeah, you're right." And so finally, they basically said, "Well, Theron, you need to get rid of her. She's making us not be dwarves anymore." And so he went and he took care of the problem, and the Silver Queen vanished for the second time from the dwarves. Now there are some who say that Theron had not the heart to destroy his greatest creation, but instead he simply set her free and said never come again into the lands of the dwarves, and that she wandered off into the world. Whether that's true or not, none can say but Theron, and he won't answer. So there's a little dwarf lore that I would have loved to put into the dwarf lore, but the dwarf lore was already the longest lore on the website, so that part got cut out. Besides, it's not the kind of thing they'd want to talk about to strangers anyway. And it's a little different. It's not axes and hammers and might and battle. It's not any of that, but it is very Wagner. It's very Ring of the Nibelung. And there's a lot of there's some Silmarillion feel to it there too. So I really dig it as a story. It's a good myth, and at the end of the day, that's all I'm trying to do is make good myths. And so there you go, brother dwarves. Put that in your mugs and drink it.